Hello everyone, my name is Jim Tripp and I'm going to talk to you guys now about the final exam that I do in my classrooms and a little bit also about the portfolio self-assessment. So my final exam is about proficiency. I want to assess what students are able to do with unscripted, spontaneous language, what they can understand and do with that language that's coming at them. I have four parts to my final assessment. There's a storytelling, which is pure listening. There's a story asking, which is more of an interpersonal group interaction that assesses via interpretive questions. There's a reading section, which is purely interpretive. And there is a writing sample as well. I'm going to quickly go over those four parts and then also talk a little bit about the final portfolio. So the storytelling part is usually the shortest element of the final exam, but I think it shows us what students can do, what students can understand best. This is different from story asking because they're not allowed to interrupt me. They're not allowed to stop me, ask me questions. They're not allowed to do any of the negotiating meaning elements that we would typically see in an interactive situation. So there's some different ways you can do this. You can pick the story out ahead of time. If you do invisibles and one-word images in your classrooms, you could just flip through your flip chart of images and pick one spontaneously, or maybe let them pick one that they've not heard about before, and tell the story. Usually this takes me anywhere between 4 and 10 minutes, depending on the level of students I'm working with. The first couple times I just did that where I was, let's do this one. I like to take a little bit of time to pick out one ahead of time. And I use the character's stories, but I do not limit myself to that character's information that we developed in the class where it was created. I will adapt that story so that it includes language that those students should be well prepared to interpret. For example, if I have a banana covered in ice cream working at a school, that is the image. That's what the students can see from my one-word image that we created, or our one-word image that we created a different year. It was last year, and I'm going to pull it up now. But they don't know. They don't know what that character actually is all about, unless they had heard it before, but those aren't ones I'm going to pick. So if my students have been talking a lot about breaking stuff breaking, or people going on trips, I can find a really simple way to include that in the storytelling. Now, if you're not real adept at on-the-fly adaptations to a story like that, you might want to plan ahead, maybe even script it out. You can do as much planning in this part as you'd like. But the point of this is to make it simple and no prep to low prep for the teacher. Okay, and sometimes it helps to just write some things down. I don't script it all out, but I will write some certain words, vocabulary words that I'm going to insert into that story and tell them. Oh, and so how do I assess that? I assess it with having them write me an English summary, or a summary in L1 in their first language. And I give them plenty of time to do it. And I tell them, the more accurately you can tell me the story, summarize the story with as much detail, the better. The second part of the final exam is the story asking. I like to start out my stories in this way, building a character together, similar to Ben Slavic's one-word image format. So I ask them to start off, is there an animal? Is there a thing? Is there a food? And then I take whatever they give me. And then we go from there. Details are accepted and assimilated into the story much quicker than a typical story asking day. We're moving along quicker. It's more comprehensive in terms of things that my students already understand how to, or already understand in general. And I'll pull questions out. So where does he live? How many times has he traveled to this country or this place? What does he hate? What does he love? How many brothers and sisters does he have? Etc. Etc. But we're moving along a little bit quicker, not super quick, and I'm not trying to make them feel defeated by any means. But we aren't parking on things and really getting into stuff. We're just moving along with the story a little bit quicker than normal. I have done some adaptations in the past. I've done interview instead of a story asking session, which I think works just as well. But this is different than the storytelling because students are allowed to negotiate meaning. They're allowed to slow me down, have me write words on the board, have me repeat, etc. So I'm going to assess this story asking part of the final exam by asking them questions in L2. In my case, asking them questions in Spanish about the story. And I'll do 10 to 15 questions. Yes or no questions, who, what, why, where, when type of questions. For the average kid who shows up, actually for any kid who shows up, they should be able to do pretty well on this. The next section is the reading. For the reading, I know on the essay that I wrote for this final exam template, the reading is me typing up the story asking and inserting some incorrect details, and then the students have to recognize what those incorrect details are and talk about them in English. Just like, oh no, the banana didn't travel to Germany last year. The banana is going to travel to Germany next year. And you're going to want to be specific on how you have them tell you that information if that's the way you want to do it. You could do a chart like what's the correct detail, what was the incorrect detail. For my upper level students this spring, I changed it up a little bit and I did a little bit of low prep here. I took about 10 to 15 minutes. I found a story from a past class, a year or two ago, and I knew that the story was pretty comprehensible, but there were some things in there that my kids wouldn't know this year. So I changed that language really quickly. I just changed some of the wording, and bam, that was the reading. At the end of it, after they'd read it, I pulled the reading away, and I asked them some questions in Spanish about the reading. You could also have them write a summary in English. Actually, I think a summary in English might be better, as long as their hand isn't getting tired now from having written the summary for the storytelling. But I do think that those English summaries are really good ways to assess comprehension. The only question I have is how much is it assessing memory versus comprehension? That is an issue and that is a question. But, and I tell this to my students, if the movie that they're making in their head is clear and is rich because they're understanding the story really well, then I think that it should be much, much easier to recall those details when they're done hearing it. I think all students, pretty much across the board, if they watch a movie or they watch a 5-minute little video about something, maybe a little Pixar video or whatever, I think pretty much all students are going to be able to remember, recall the details, and communicate those in their first language. So I think if the movie is clear, that shows me that there's a lot of interpretation going on of the story that they've just read. And I think same thing goes for the storytelling part as well. That's why I still am in support of L1 summaries as assessment. Something that I've changed, and I feel good about this change, from the essay that accompanies this video, is when I do the writing element of the final exam. I used to do it in that 10-minute time when I was writing up the story that we just story asked. Now, in that 10 to 15-minute chunk of time, now, instead, I am having them do a self-assessment of their writing portfolio during that time. Part of their final exam is their writing portfolio. Bob Patrick has created a wonderful document I believe it's called Portfolio Self-Assessment. Hopefully there'll be a link to that somewhere. He shared that freely with other people. And it asks students to go over all of their timed writes from the year and look and see which one they think is the best. And it asks them to write the date, how many words they wrote, and why they think it's the best. And then they also likewise look at the worst one and the same little details they ask for. You can do this as formally or informally as you would like. You can make it be a grade. You can make it just be a simple self-assessment. That's the road I usually take. I don't like to add another grade. For these kids, usually it's an eye-opening thing. They see it. It's the last day of class. It's the final exam, and they get to go leave class thinking, "Wow, I've made some serious growth." That's why I now do the final writing sample the day or two before the final exam, so that then I can give that back to them after I've had a chance to read them and maybe grade it. It depends. I don't write the grades. I don't do all that on the actual assessment. I just put it in the grade book, and then they can go and see what grade I gave them for their writing. Or I might give them a separate rubric sheet. I don't do this for first and second year, and not always even for third and fourth year. If there's a class that doubts my evaluation of how I'm going about evaluating their writing samples, then I'll include a rubric. But most of the time, Alfie Kohn has shared a really encapsulating quote about this. When students get something back that has a grade and feedback on it, the first thing that they look at is the grade. The second thing they look at is their neighbor's grade or their classmate's grade. That's why I don't even put it on there. Put it in the grade book. They can go check it out there if they have questions. I want them to be focused on what they did, on the content, on any comments I might have made about, wow, this is good, and I try to stay positive if I make any comments. It's about the content, not about errors or what they were lacking necessarily. So they are going through their timed writes during this time. Gives me a little break. I'm coming around and helping them. Plus, it's helping me keep them organized. Students pass out all the timed writes. I have a couple volunteers just passing them all out. I keep them in little file folders, and then they each get their own file folder. They put them all in there chronologically ordered. It's brilliant. That's their portfolio. They get it at the end when they graduate or when they leave the program. I really love doing writing sample portfolios in that way as a tangible thing that they can leave with and see growth. Thank you for listening. I hope this final exam template can make your life easier and can help assess your students in proficiency versus performance, assessing students on what they can do in the moment, what is in their head, and how they will react and how they will interpret language coming at them in an unrehearsed, in an unscripted, in a spontaneous context. Thank you very much. Have an excellent year.